I am the Director of Resilience Impact, and we do training and conferences around social emotional learning, mental health practices, and trauma-informed systems of care within schools. And so I'm pleased to have you joining me. This is one of a series of monthly trainings that we do here at Resilience Impact. So you will continue to get some emails. We're taking the month of June and July off, but starting back in August, continue to get those notifications of these free trainings that we offer. So if you ever have an idea of a topic that you want us to cover or a speaker that you think would be good, we are always looking for those things. So please send those ideas my way, or a question that you want answered. We'd love to think about how we can serve you and how we can help address those needs that you're seeing in your building on a day-to-day basis. So again, those of you just joining, my name is Denise Moody, the Director of Resilience Impact, and so excited to have you all joining me. We are going to be hearing today from my friend, Mitch Weathers from Organized Binder, around the topic of classroom routines to support executive functioning. So I know that this is a topic that lots of people are thinking about. And as we have students in our classrooms that are maybe struggling a little bit on how to organize themselves and be able to be in a place where they can learn. So really excited to have Mitch with us today.
Thank you for the handoff. Thank you, everybody, for being here. This is quite the honor. I'm going to share my screen here in a little bit with you all. And just as kind of an introduction, I am a teacher, and yes, I designed a program called Organized Binder, and it is all about students developing executive functions. But this is not an Organized Binder introduction. I want to be very clear about that. But I also want to tell you that I will show you parts of the program to make clear some points I'm trying to make, not as a way to say like, here's what Organized Binder looks like, but as a way to say what this might look like in a classroom that's not using our program. So I just wanted a little disclaimer there, but thank you for being here. This is an honor. And let's just jump in here. I forgot to put her handle up, but this was a post on, I think, Instagram this week. And it really is true that just as we don't expect students to automatically know how to read, we can't expect them to automatically develop these executive functioning skills like organization and time management. I'll show you some more. And yet what research has shown and we're seeing is that historically we kind of left it up to chance, but that we can no longer do that. And in particular, coming off of these last 2 years of, there's lots of different names for it. I've been referring to it as interrupted schooling or punctuated learning. There's never been a time to really teach these executive functions. And that's what we're going to dive into here. Another starting place too, if I'm kind of on a self-proclaimed mission to bring this work to the gen ed classroom as well. When you hear terms like executive functioning or non-cognitive skills, or dysregulated students, universal tier 1 supports, MTSS, we'll talk about that. It's kind of historically lived in the special ed world. But with that tier 1, we really need this work in every classroom to help students be successful. So you are in the right place if your students are struggling to engage and focus. You are in the right place if you want strategies to hone your class time management and behavior management skills, if you're a teacher. You're in the right place if you're seeking to develop a more consistent learning routine. You'll hear me say this a lot in the next hour. A predictable or consistent learning routine, I'm a big believer, creates safer learning environments, recognizing that certainly not for all students, but for many of our students, life outside of school is not consistent and not predictable. It might even be chaotic. So giving that consistency, predictability can really allow students to lower their affective filters. So Krashen talked about engage in the work, and students are just more likely to take risks inherent to learning when they're in safer spaces. You're in the right place if you've noticed that technology has not solved, maybe even exacerbated some of the issues you might be facing or your students are facing over the last 2 years. And fifth, if you're looking for new ways to engage the families that you serve. So you're in the right place. There's a bunch more, but I'd start with those 5. I want you to feel a sense of victory coming out of this. And sticking with 5 reasons, if you're here, I want you to really get 5 takeaways, but I'm going to pause. I encourage you to have a notebook or something that you can be taking notes. I'm gonna move incredibly fast, way too fast, but there's a lot of good takeaways for you. Not just the 5 I'm about to show you, but I really think you are going to want to write some of these down. So if you haven't yet, grab a pen or a pencil and something to write with, because this is really important information. The first is that, and by the way, I'm going to move fast, so don't feel like you got to write everything. We're going to host this for you to go back and review if you want. So predictable learning routines. I just talked about this create safer learning environments where students are more likely to take the risks that really are inherent to learning. Okay, predictable learning routine. Keep that in mind. This might be why you're here. Executive functioning skills are the foundation of academic and workplace success, and students need them now more than ever. These executive functions, these skills or habits really are, in terms of the foundation upon which we build our curriculum and content. And as students hone them and make them their own, they enter into their learning or their schooling with a sense of agency and confidence or dexterity, kind of regardless of what they're learning. When students gain practice with these skills by virtue of engaging in the predictable learning routine, it's a win-win. And of all the takeaways, I hope you get this. And what it really I'm trying to say here is it's a time issue. You would never meet an educator that's like, no, I don't think students need these executive functioning skills. Of course, everybody see like goal setting and time management and organizational skills and working memory and these things we're going to dive into. The problem is time. Most of us, regardless of, if you're in the elementary space and you're teaching a self-contained single, classroom, or you're a single subject, middle school or high school, rarely do we have enough time to get through what we're charged to teach. And so where am I going to find the time to teach these executive functions? So the way they're best learned, we'll get into, is by engaging in that predictable routine. So we kind of mash up 1 and 2 there. Shared learning routines. This work has a more profound impact when students experience it from class to class to class. Again, that's more of a middle high school environment, just getting more practice with it. But a predictable routine that's shared with colleagues does not infringe upon academic freedom or the way in which you teach your content, the thing you do. So I'll make that point as well. And then the 5th takeaway, no one would argue, students with more engaged family members or parents are just more successful. And yet for me, and a lot of the work I've done now and been teaching for 20 years, I couldn't, as a high school teacher, necessarily always depend upon families or parents to support their students in terms of like content or curriculum, right? So some of the concepts we're learning, maybe they weren't there to help, or not to help, but didn't have maybe that content knowledge. But by no means did that suggest that they don't want to be engaged. And I've found over the years that a really kind of profound way of engaging families and parents is around the development of these executive functions. On a digital note, I'm going to talk a lot about analog, real world, tactile, kinesthetic. My binder, my company is called Organized Binder. So you're going to see a lot of that, but I do want to throw this out there for anybody who wants to follow up with me. I teach in a fully online, asynchronous, independent study program. So fully digital. And all of my students use Organized Binder, and it's really powerful. The key there is blending, okay? Blending those environments so that students can hone these skills. That's not the point of this talk, but I just wanted to throw that out there because that question comes up, and I would love to have that conversation with you if that's of interest. So I'll start by saying I often see teaching and learning of these executive functions. It's very much like navigating with a topographic map and a compass. So if you can kind of go on this journey or this story with me, it's similar to, if we well, let me just say this: if we put somebody, gave them a map, and we gave them a compass and maybe a ruler and a pencil, and picked a destination on the map and said, okay, now navigate your way there. They have all of the resources, they have the devices, the equipment, they have what they need. But if you've never triangulated and used a compass, you would be less successful navigating to your destination. When it might be thought that, well, that's in the modern world, I'll just plug my destination into GPS and it'll take me there, which is a fantastic technology, of course. But for our dysregulated our students who are struggling, and these numbers, of course, have just increased in the last 2 years in response to what we've experienced. For those students, it's like being in the wilderness, out in nature where there is no signal, there's no GPS. In the same way, we've equipped them with devices, we've equipped them with materials, but they have absolutely no idea how to engage with them because they lack the basic skills, because they haven't practiced it. And that's what these executive functions are when it comes to learning. If I've never had practice or exposure to them, I don't know what to do, so I'm going to be less likely getting to my destination, which in this case is about being successful academically. So it's not just about giving devices and curriculum or even like really great lesson plans. There's this foundational piece, which are these executive functions. And I'll abbreviate it to EF so that you can see there. And if you're new to these executive functioning skills, they're really the mental processes that enable us to plan, focus our attention, remember instructions, juggle multiple tasks successfully. A few schools that we work with, I love this term, they call it studentness. And I used to, before I had the language around this, it was like, oh, it's all that stuff you need to be able to do to be successful learning that no one ever really talks about or teaches. And if my lived experience gave me exposure to and practice with them, I might have those. But if it didn't, then I'm left being probably less successful. This is an interesting quote from Paul Tough in How Children Succeed. And I think it's important. This isn't just about poor versus rich students, but improving these executive functioning seems to a potentially promising vehicle for narrowing achievement gaps between poor and middle class kids. And if we can improve a child's environment in specific ways that lead to better executive functioning, we can increase his or her prospects of success in a particularly efficient way. And I want to draw your attention here to improve a child's environment. That's where this routine is going to come in. Why are these important now? I've said this a lot. They're the bedrock for academic and workplace success. Students develop a sense of agency and confidence in kind of how they approach whatever they're learning. So they're content agnostic. And there's really interesting research that's come out of Stanford in the last couple of years that shows the part of the brain that is where executive functioning is processed actually has an impact or helps protect against depression and anxiety. And if, of course, looking at the last 2 years, both are on the rise. So there really is no better time, both for academic success, but well-being, which is a point we'll make here. When we look at social emotional well-being or SEL curriculums, executive functioning needs to be a part of this because there is this brain research, but just being more successful, I believe, successful academically, these executive functions can help us succeed academically and actually be happier. So a quick note before we dive in, here is an MTSS pyramid. If you're new to this, most of you probably have seen this. The need for a tier 1. And I want to draw your attention there that the universal is all students. Here's what I believe, and this is where executive functions come in, and I believe this from years of experience now, that a real tier 1 universal solution or resource for all students, so that's gen ed, that's all classrooms, needs to do two things, a minimum of two things. One, help identify areas of need in students, and oftentimes address those or mitigate those to help the student achieve. Okay? And when they can't address those, that's the time when it would become a more targeted tier 2 intervention. But if we don't have something at that tier 1 level, and my argument's going to be that's where executive functions need to be taught, so that when it is a need for tier 2, we're not overtaxing that pyramid by sending everything up tier 2. And a friend of mine has a great saying that you can't tier 2 yourself out of a tier 1 problem. We really need that universal foundation. So great research out of this is kind of a go-to paper for me in terms of non-cognitive factors or executive functioning skills. But when we help students develop these skills, strategies, attitudes, and behaviors that are the hallmark of effective learners, we can improve student learning, so that's in the present, and course performance, while also increasing the likelihood that they'll be successful in college, and I would put /workplace. So here specifically, we're going to look at 6 executive functioning skills. To be honest, I'm going to teach 3 of those, or how they can be taught, and then I'll mention the other 3 at the end. That's just for the sake of time. And I'll come back to these slides. Like I said, I'm moving really quick. So let's get to it. If you're taking notes, there's 3 words I want you to write down. Teaching executive functions. So let me back up and say they're not really taught. Executive functions are best learned when we're hyper explicit about them, when we embed practice into a predictable learning routine, so how we start, how we transition, all of that, that's what we'll spend our time on. And 3, when students see them modeled. Okay? They're not taught in kind of a traditional didactic sense. You know, a lesson on the importance of goal setting and how you set goals falls flat compared to setting goals within the context of the grade level or the subject that I'm learning, and then measuring constantly to see if that's working. Is there evidence of that? Is there data towards that? Which is why a curriculum that promises to teach executive functions is usually less effective than actually practicing them and seeing them modeled. So let's look at number 1, being explicit. We just have to be very overt and clear about why we're doing what we're doing and the skill students are practicing and learning. And the key here is ambiguity is the enemy. I mean, this is true of any teaching. Any successful change requires a translation of ambiguous goals into concrete behavior. In order to make the switch, you must script the critical moves. That's where that routine comes in. With Organized Binder, what we've done is created a very explicit, color-coded for visual cueing, for nonverbal communication in the classroom, so that students can keep up with and engage with the class community. It is completely explicit. And again, I'm going to show you these images and then show you others that would be in classrooms not using that program. So being explicit and then implementing a learning routine. I'm going to draw your attention to the last sentence here for the sake of time. Consider one unmistakable driver of students' achievement: carefully built and practiced routines. That's that consistency, that dependability, which again, I argue is a safer learning environment. With Organized Binder, go into that color coding. There's this thing called the Weekly Lifeline we start the school day or the class with. And then we transition to a green agenda to introduce the lesson. And we get ourselves organized with the table of contents. Sometimes we go into our academic toolkit, which has some tools and resources. And we end with the learning log. And that's the daily routine. There's a beginning and ending, but most of the time, teachers are doing what they do, teach their class. So when I say a daily learning routine, my argument to you today is going to be the first few minutes and the last few minutes, because you have a job to do if you're a teacher. And we need to actually carve out more time for you to teach your standards or curriculum or content, do the thing you do. And having a routine in place can help. And by virtue of that routine, if you look here, our beginning routine, we're going to work on the executive function called working memory. The agenda, which is where we go to, you can see the topographic map and the path here, or the trail. I hope you're seeing that. We're working on time and task management, table of contents and appendix is organization, and we come back to something called working memory. So being explicit, having a routine, and then modeling. This is an important piece. In moving to college or in career readiness, we must now teach some skills formerly learned on your own. Those are the executive functioning skills. And again, I'm empathetic. Where do we find the time to do this? We don't have the time. So if we embed that practice into the routine and we're modeling it so students can see it, they're more likely to hone these. So this is an organized binder. And again, I'm going to be showing you classrooms like this that are not using organized binder, but are using these instructional strategies to be explicit, routine, and modeling. All right, so let's dive in. Hopefully you're taking notes. We're going to start at the beginning of the day, and we're going to make our way through. I'm going to keep coming back to this graphic. How we begin the school day or the class period or the learning session, whatever your environment is. We start with, and this is kind of the only executive function I'll pause and define for you because it can be a little bit elusive as opposed to others, or you may have not been introduced to it. But working memory is really important for students in particular, their attentional skills. So working memory is kind of described as the ability to go back and retrieve or utilize information that's in memory to solve a problem or task at hand. And we know that students with weaker working memories have greater difficulties in the classroom. Here's the good news, and this is true about all of these executive functions. They can be learned and get stronger if, guess what? I get daily practice with them. So if I am struggling to pay attention because I have a weaker working memory, well, if I have a very consistent and predictable learning routine, that's going to help me pay attention. I'm going to argue for some color coding to help with that. But if I just begin each day giving you the opportunity to go back and retrieve, make connections with what you've learned or been exposed to, I'm actually giving you practice utilizing your working memory, which means it's going to get stronger. Okay. So for Organized Binder, when we start class, it's on something called a Weekly Lifeline. It's behind that B tab. We start with something called a kickoff. You can steal all of this language and terminology for your classroom as well. And the kickoff is, we use that term on purpose because if you think of any game, I'll just say a soccer game, there's all this prep that has to happen before the game begins. And most soccer players, you're not even thinking about it anymore because you've done it your whole life. But the deal is you need to be ready to go when the whistle blows and the game starts for the sake of your team. And the same is true for learning. Students need practice knowing what it looks like to be ready to engage or learn. And so for us, this would be projected in the classroom or someplace where they could see it. And it's a nonverbal visual cue to be considered on time. You're just in your assigned place with your binder open to this Weekly Lifeline. The one in front of it's gold, the page behind it's green. And if there's 30 students in a room, I have 29 visual reminders. I have the one that I can see up there, all helping reduce friction to engage with the class community. Because for many students, they spend a significant amount of time or cognitive energy just navigating the school day. You can just imagine, let's just think of multi-language learners, where I'm translating, I'm trying to keep up, and if I'm in an environment where I go from class to class to class and each function's different with different expectations, it's just taxing. So if I can have a predictable routine, we start each day this way, I liberate some of those mental calories to focus on what I'm trying so hard to teach and learn. And so going to the working memory, here's the key for the beginning routine. If I have a prompt that students respond to, okay, it allows me, one great thing is I get to reteach and revisit previous days' content standards or objectives to make sure students get them. It kind of becomes a safety net for students because they know this is a no stakes, it's not a quiz, it's just a kickoff. A way to get their questions answered or misconceptions cleared up. But all the while, they're having to respond to this prompt that's like, hey, we did this on whatever. By the way, research is really clear that the more explicit we are about it, the objectives of each lesson, the more likely students are to retain them. So let's just say this hypothetical Monday, what was the point of my lesson? What was the objective or the standard? And can I distill that down into a prompt that allows students to, again, get their questions answered if they have any, record the prompt and respond to it so they have a resource they can look back on and study from. All the while, though, that process is engaging their working memory. And if we do that every day, I get to reteach, they get their questions answered, they create a resource, and their working memory is getting stronger. This is what it might look like in an organized binder classroom. And here's some that have been shared with me with teachers who've experienced this training that aren't using organized binder. They got the language there, but you can see that at the top of it must be the daily notes. They're starting with some type of kickoff prompt. Here's another one, and to draw your attention there, it doesn't always have to be written. These prompts, again, are meant to be a kickoff, going back, retrieving, making connections with what I'm learning or something in the present. It gives me that reteach. Students are recording it. It's not a quiz. I encourage you to have a beginning routine, hence the term kickoff. That's just that. We got to be ready to go, but when we start, we dive in together. So just some other examples of what that might look like. And I'm also showing you those from classrooms that students or teachers maybe don't have access to making copies or a printer or something like that, and they're just simply using some lined paper. At the end of this kickoff time, this is the only time I have to kind of show you it through the organized binder lens, because this checkbox is important, in my opinion. And what we do at the end, whenever this time has concluded, we say, okay, now check yourself. And what students usually do is they write a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. That's the scale most of us are using. 1's like, I'm lost, I don't get it. 5 would be like, I got it. And if you stop and think about this, like, this is a metacognitive activity. How often do students get practice figuring out what it looks like when they learn something? Because it's different for everybody. So to give them daily opportunity, where are you on that journey? And the thing I love, in what I encourage is teachers walking around getting really quick formative feedback as students are self-assessing. But what I love most about this is that when I'm in that learning environment, it creates a space where it's okay to be a 1 or 2. Okay, so back to our compass analogy, and I tell students this all the time, like, learning is a journey. We don't always just get it, all right? And I think students can perceive learning as very binary, like I either got it or I don't. And unfortunately, if I don't, and if I consistently don't, I might be pulling back. And we all know those are those times when I need to lean in. And so I can walk around and I'm seeing who are the 1s and 2s and telling them that, like, it's okay. In fact, I need to know that. That helps me help you be more successful, but creating this learning environment where it truly is a journey. I would encourage you to have these all stored, probably chronologically in the binder. For us, of course, that's tab B, but it can be something that you just create. And I put an arrow there for the toolkit because we're going to come back to that in just a moment. So in terms of our routine, and this is, I told you I'd show you that this is going to switch from organized binder. You would have a beginning routine that does all of this. The executive function is working memory. What they're doing with that is something called retrieval practice. I'll talk about in a moment. And then I would do this agenda table of contents, and we typically end class with a similar reflection. So if you're picking up on this, that beginning routine is a reflection of something we've learned previously. I'm going to jump to the end of class or the school day because for organized binder, that's on the same actual document, making bell-to-bell instruction a reality. It doesn't have to be on the same document. I can explain why. But for us, we offer some very basic sentence frames. And what we're hoping students do is that I'll go back here. You can see where it says kickoff and then learning log. I want to pause and say this encourages teachers to begin with the end in mind, the lesson plan strategy. So if I am a middle school teacher and I have you for 50 minutes, what is it that I hope you can demonstrate or articulate or make connections with at the end of that time? It's going to utilize your working memory. The stuff's not as stored as far back as maybe the previous day or weeks, might be happening with the beginning routine. But with the ending routine, we're reflecting on what we learned or experienced today. Okay, so we're constantly coming back to that reflection piece. And this I just showed, this is somebody that uses, they call it a summary at the end of the learning session or class period, and having students reflect. It doesn't, again, have to be on something like the Weekly Lifeline. But I would encourage you to have a closing activity that utilizes working memory. Students need a structured organization for the concepts they're learning. They also need to deepen their thinking by attaching context to the content through their own personal experiences, and reflective closure activities can provide that opportunity. And if you're reading between the lines there, that requires working memory. Here's just an example for one, an organized binder. But I encourage you, and in fact, I would implore you, if you try some of these strategies, or if you're a school or district leader and you're thinking of implementing some of these, it's key that these reflections, especially the end of class or the end of the school day, are read by the teacher and commented on. So it becomes this private one-on-one conversation between the teacher and the student. And you can imagine, like in a high school setting, if I have 150 students, wow, what a amazing time. And I can have that intimate connection with every student in a way that we just don't have the time, obviously, to have that verbally, one-on-one, all of the time, but we can every day if it's being written. So reading these can be really, really critical. I'm going to draw your attention to, because I'm going to come back to retrieval practice. So the last sentence here, elaboration is the process of giving new material meaning, so what we did today, expressing it in your own words, so your own voice, and connecting it with what you already know. Okay, that's the gist of that learning log and the kickoff, and it takes working memory. This is my educational hero, so I always have to quote Freire that liberating education consists in acts of cognition, not transferals of information. And yet I love the dichotomy here. There's information we need to transfer. We're teachers, right? But if I don't carve out opportunities for these moments of cognition, they're less likely to learn it or retain it. And so if we just embed those into the routine, kick off, how we begin, we have kind of this check, we have a reflection at the end, moments of cognition. And what that takes is something called retrieval practice. This is a great read. It's like an organized binder manual, powerful teaching, fairly new book. But I love how they word it here. In order to transform learning, we must focus on getting information out, a strategy called retrieval practice. And that's the kickoff. That's learning about, that's even that check. Okay, that's the beginning and ending routine. And the key here is we're not talking about accuracy or not, being correct or not, if there is a right answer. This is about process. This is about how the brain works and how we learn. So that's the important part of embedding it into the routine. If you're back to that one or two, that's okay. You're still engaging in this routine. This is all built on Marzano's work to find about exposures. We use the word marinate. We're just going to keep coming back to it. But his suggestion is exposures multiple times, at least 3, ideally no more than 2 days apart. And if you stick with this routine, we're beginning and ending with this retrieval practice, which takes working memory. I give my lesson 1 exposure. I have a concluding activity where we reflect, 2nd exposure. If you do any next steps outside of class or school, 3rd exposure, when you come back to me in a no stakes way of kicking off the learning period or the school day, we have another exposure. It could be as many as 4. So that makes bell-to-bell instruction a reality, which can be really important in the middle school and high school setting. But once we have utilized our working memory and started the day with our beginning routine, then we got to make a plan. And this is about just introducing the lesson, and it gives us a unique, so the introduction to the lesson, which is done everywhere, almost in every classroom where you have some type of class agenda or something, oftentimes written up on a whiteboard. There's a unique opportunity to model and teach the skill of time and task management. So again, being explicit, here's our routine, and modeling this skill. In Organized Binder, we call it an agenda. If you were in my class, here's what we're doing today, here's if we have homework, and typically I would move on, and you're recording that. I'm going to show you this on organized binder because I think it can be a little bit clearer than the image of a non-organized binder classroom. But what we encourage is that teachers every once in a while, not every day, pick some larger, weightier kind of upcoming assignment or assessment, introduce it, and put it on the agenda. So I might say, if this was my hypothetical science class, we're here on this Monday, I might say, hey, we're going to do a lab this week, and I'm going to introduce lab reports next week. And at the end of the second week, seems like forever from now, your first lab report's due. So let's go ahead and write that on our agenda, because that's what people do who keep a calendar. And students would write it in on their agenda. And I'll tell you what, I'm not going to give anything outside of class, next steps, or homework the Thursday before, because I want you to finalize that. So let's write that on our agenda, because that's what people do who keep a calendar. And then I'd move on, just modeling this, I'd move on. And then Tuesday, we would have started class with our beginning routine, update the agenda, typically move on. Wednesday, Thursday, as we're going through, at the very least, no one's going to be surprised of what was coming up. And kind of on the higher end, they're seeing this very foundational skill of time and task management being modeled for them, and they're practicing it. And if you can take it kind of to the next level, so here would be a planner. This is a teacher that sent theirs in. You can see how they're doing it vertically each day in a week, helping students kind of spot what's happening. However you do it, if you can take a moment to model that, and if your school happens to have planners, we provide those if schools don't. And the reason we try to do that is, imagine now someone saying, okay, especially, again, I'm going to speak to middle high school, if I'm going from class to class to class, maybe I could look at the agenda and start writing other things from other classes on my calendar, which would really start to reinforce that skill of time and task management. So starting with that retrieval practice, working memory, making a plan, that's being very explicit. And then the next step is we got to get organized. If you're going to do any project, any type of activity, getting your stuff together is going to help you be more successful, which is why it's the third step in the routine. And of course, the executive function is organization. With Organized Binder, we have a table of contents. I'm going to show you one that's non in just a second. And all we do, here's our hypothetical day, the 14th, anything that's created or that students are given, or it's taken out of a consumable, gets listed on the table of contents. And so this is meant to, you can see that this learning routine structures a lesson plan in a lot of ways. The table of contents helps structure and give context to a teacher's unit lesson plan or unit sequencing. And so each day, if you follow that date column, we just add to this. It takes a few seconds or a minute. Doesn't need to be pre-populated. And as I'm going through whatever unit of curriculum, it doesn't really matter the type of assignment. It's just meant to be, the lens here is everything in this unit, anything we're doing. So it could have point value in the grade book, it could not. I would encourage you to have students keep track of their scores in an analog way. I love online grade books, but there's something about writing that down and being held accountable to see how my effort is translating in the class. All students do. Look how simple this is. If you look at that number column, they write the number in the upper right-hand corner. I'll show you one right there. It could look something like the binder paper. It could be something out of a consumable or that you've created. And again, it doesn't have to be an organized binder table of contents. But helping students, not all at once, just each day, if you look at the date column here, just practice that skill of indexing in a very simple way of keeping track of their work and resources. And at the end, so we're trying to take it out of here and put it into thematic unit chunks. When you get to the end, every teacher I've ever met in all over the country and internationally, we all teach through some type of thematic unit of curriculum, and we want to capture that. So when I get to the end of the unit, I can staple that together and create this unit chunk, and then I start a new unit, a new table of contents. And if I'm consistent with that and I get to the end of the school year, like these two students in my 9th grade, this is a limited English proficient, we call it LEP, general science class. And these are two students studying for a cumulative final in June with everything they've created or been given neatly chunked in these thematic packets, with all of the beginning routine prompts, all of their ending reflections. Talk about a robust resource for them to learn to study from and equip them to study from. And some of us tend to make like a cover sheet that would digest what that unit was, like distill it down, and this is what it's all about. These are actually taken from my students now. I just wanted to show you they're creating unit packets. They're doing all of this work, and again, it's an asynchronous digital environment, which I'll tell you about later. They're used to study from. For us, they end up back in the binder. If you're not using organized binder, they can still end up in the back of the binder. And we call them, some schools we work with call them trophies or the crown jewel. And I think this is really worth noting in our increasingly digital approach to education. There's something about that tangible, tactile evidence of my effort and my learning that can be really powerful. And think about sequential classes. If I have my portfolio from my previous math class or my previous grade level, how does that set me up for success in a way that if I didn't have it? I think it can be really powerful. So we begin with that beginning, reteach, working memory. We make a plan, time and task management, get organized, and then you also have to have a toolkit, right? Any project, like what are the tools and resources I'm going to need to be successful? And that's, for us, it's called an academic toolkit. You can call it an appendix, like you see on this diagram here. This is trying to make the distinction for students and maybe for teachers that not everything in this class is just stuff or work or assignments from this class, that some do belong in coherent units of curriculum, while others, these are tools and things that I need from unit to unit to unit, or something I'm going to add to from unit to unit to unit. So making that distinction can be really helpful in populating the toolkit. It usually doesn't have quite as many resources. You can start to imagine for your grade level or the subject area you teach what might be in your toolkit. And just to make it clear, instead of it being number 1, number 2, number 3, we would encourage this F1, F2, F3. Here's somebody doing it, again, just with line paper. And these are the resources that would be filed back there. So again, the routine is very simple and meant to utilize the first few minutes and last few minutes. And by virtue of just how we begin, how we transition, where we store our stuff, students are getting practice with some very fundamental executive functioning skills. I want to keep saying this. I said it at the beginning, it's meant to actually carve out more time for you to teach your class because you have a job to do. And asking you to spend more of your instructional time teaching these executive functions, not to mention that they're not really learned that way, really isn't a win for you. But if you embed them into the routine, they can get practice with it. So the 3 that I mentioned, just to be sensitive to our time, I won't go into any great detail on, because I wanted to focus on the daily routine for this, but goal setting, self-regulation, and accountability are practiced periodically. And I'll mention an opportunity for you at the end of this webinar to take kind of a deeper dive and see how those can be taught. But I wanted to hone in on that daily routine as a kind of a deep introduction to teaching executive functions. I always kind of conclude with Dweck, because she's right on the money here, that simply raising standards in our schools without giving students the means of reaching them is a recipe for disaster. It just pushes the poorly prepared or poorly motivated students into failure and out of school. And so that scaffolding, if you will, as we raise the standards, the means of reaching them, I believe, and have seen now for many years, is found in the honing of these executive functions. So I'm going to pause. I said that I would share my contact information. I would absolutely love to hear from you. Again, this doesn't have to do anything with Organized Binder, but if this is resonating with you and you have kind of a deeper question or you want to have a conversation about any of this, this is me, how to get a hold of me. And obviously Mitch at Organized Binder is personal to get a hold of me. Okay, so I'm going to pause if you're recording that. And then I kind of have a special gift for you, 3 freebies and a course. And I just want to take a moment, and we have plenty of time for this, but I like to be completely transparent. This is a disclaimer. I'm going to give you the opportunity to get free resources, and I'm going to give you a 30% coupon code off of our course that's called How to Teach Executive Functions in Any Classroom, which takes this conversation we're having and goes really deep. And not only just 30% off, but a lifetime access to that course and the resources there. If this is resonating with you, I think you'll really, really enjoy that. So I just wanted to say, this is not meant to be, this whole thing was just meant to be a webinar, but I am going to give you an opportunity here. So if that doesn't sit well with you, I totally respect that. That's why I put my contact information before, if you want to reach out. But if you don't want to hear this opportunity, this would be a great time to log off. But I hope you stick around. 3 resources, coupon code, and the recording. So first, we want to make available, and we've had teachers ask for, hey, can we get that list of the executive functioning skills that looks like a map? I'd love to have that as a resource just to remind me of these skills, how to teach them, where they would fit in my instruction. So we're going to have a free download of this resource, and the same has been asked of the daily learning routine. And not just the routine, like beginning and ending, but what executive function I'm supposed to, or I'm trying to model and make explicit for students by virtue of this routine. And here's the thing, everybody, it's meant to be this daily practice, right? I just keep getting practice, and I start to hone it and make it my own. So we're going to make this resource available as well. And this is the only Organized Binder thing that, and I just want you to know this, again, this isn't like sneaking it in, you got to check out our parent guide. But in terms of that parent engagement, and doing so in a way that's not tied to content or the understanding of content or curriculum, what we've done at Organized Binder is taken our fairly robust training and distilled it down into a guide for families or a guide for parents. You can also seek guardians, tutors, any stakeholder really, or support provider. And it explains this routine, right? It explains the kind of executive functioning, why we're doing it, but then it offers prompts for them, for the family members or the parents to kind of take the conversation deeper or beyond. How was school today? What did you learn? Did you have any homework? Right? Like, which is kind of like a lot, those conversations are happening all the time, where what if we could say, like, here's a few interesting things to ask specifically about goal setting, or about that beginning routine and the reflection and the how we're working on working memory, or looking at that time and task management. So it kind of it equips the parents with a resource to take that conversation deeper, all the while supporting this work from home. Okay, so those are those 3 pieces: the student, executive function, teacher, this predictable learning routine, and then engaging the family in that. So here is your opportunity, and I'm going to give you a URL, and I think it'll end up in the chat. I don't have access to the chat at the moment, so don't worry about writing any of this down. The URL is very simple, and our website's pretty easy to remember, organizedbinder.com. But we have this course on teaching executive functions, and if you have both of those visuals or graphics, and you have that parent guide from our work, the point of the parent guide is just to give you ideas about how you can do it on your own. It doesn't have to be an Organized Binder thing, but the parent piece is important. So we want to equip you with all 3 and give you the opportunity to take this course at a discount, and not just, again, a 1-year membership. This is for you all. It's going to be lifetime. And it's complete with certification. We like to say it is a course that's designed by teachers for teachers. And what I mean by that is it should take anywhere from about 60 to 120 minutes, so an hour or two max, because my experience is most of us don't have time for a 5-hour online training, even if we want to. So you can get a ton of value out of this, and it's all sitting right here for you. And on early next week, Monday or Tuesday, we will host this whole recording on this as well. So you'll have free resources that can set you up for success with the course. If you're not interested in the course, no worries, get the free resources. And then check back early next week, and we'll have the recording there for you as well. And just so you know, I know that I've given these webinars before, and some people, there's kind of an urgency, but their school might purchase the course for them. The course, if in that case, is going like through a PO process, and they need a little bit more time. It's not like, hey, I can get it right now, which feel free to do that as well. We're going to leave that coupon code resilience, you'll see that at the landing page, open for you all through the 25th, through the end of next week. Okay. So how to teach executive functions. My hope is that you found this relevant to your practice, and that you got some value from this. And I really appreciate you being here. I'll let you take it over, Denise.
Well, we do have a question in the chat if you'd be willing
I
to
have
address
time.
it.
I would love to chat with people. So
Okay, I gotta find the chat and go up here. So I think the question is about the agenda. If they're reading the feedback on that learning check piece overnight, how does the student track the homework? How is it all in the same spot, or like how does that work just logistically?
Gotcha. And I skipped over that. My recommendation with that, are we talking about the ending reflection piece?
I believe that was where we were at. Yeah.
Let's talk about, everyone's probably heard of the exit ticket. And I'm not a big proponent, not trying to step on anybody's toes. And again, this is compounded at the middle and high school level, but even in elementary, I just may not have time every single day to read 150 student reflections. That's the truth, right? We have to be mindful of sustainable practices. I mean, look at the attrition rates in our industry, right? And now after the last 2 years, it's just like grinding people up. So sustainability is important. Formative feedback is important. So I know the need, I want to read those every day. So I've had people say, well, I just read a couple of them from the class to get an idea of where everybody is. And that doesn't work, because you've asked me to bare my soul about what I'm learning or I'm confused about. And the person next to me got it, I didn't. And you happen to pick that one. And you're basing your instruction on something that's not accurate. So when it's in a binder, okay, students get to see their reflections every day. This is why I love Google Forms and things, but I send my thing in and off it goes to some spreadsheet. And I don't see that spreadsheet like I do when I sit down and I open up my binder. Some teachers, if they have the capacity, and truly it's about student numbers typically, can read those every day if they want by simply walking around during that time. I've stood at my classroom door. You guys show me, because I need to get I'll take a deeper read. At the end of each week, those are collected and read. That's why organized binder, it's on one piece of paper, because it makes that possible. Where we begin the class with that kickoff and where we conclude with what we call the learning log, like that does not need to be an organized binder thing, right? But that type of functionality of going back and forth on a weekly basis is sustainable. And I'll tell you what, it's the only place we dare teachers to try it, because if you do, and it's actually the only place in this whole routine that I'm talking about that takes time outside of class. But if you commit to reading these, even if it's Friday afternoon or over the weekend, it's like having a pulse on every student when you show up to class on Monday. And when they know you're reading them, we spend a lot of time on this in our trainings, because ultimately what we all do is a human to human endeavor. And if we lose the humanity because we're so focused on the content or curriculum, what are we doing? So when students are writing to us, it might be about the content, but I can't tell you how many times I have some prompt and I'm really excited to see what they can do with it. And some kid tells me about why they haven't done homework for 2 weeks and what's going on at home with my dad or what, because they know I'm reading it. So there's a lot there. And so I don't want to set a teacher up for failure by saying, you got to read these every day. It's like, I can't. I might, but I may not. Or I might need to read them every day for a subset of my students. So I think having that kind of dexterity with this formative piece is important. Sorry I skipped over that. I was like staring at the clock trying to rush. Any other questions? It's okay if not. This is so fun. I hope you're having fun. These are just so fun to meet you all. And I know we're not really talking. I'm doing all the talking, but I appreciate you being here.
Just bouncing off of that a little bit, I'm going to be a first-year teacher next year.
Right on.
And thank you. So you talked about reading the kickoff and summary. And I've had different teachers kind of give me advice about just practicing a skill and whether or not they're doing worksheets or however student practice is happening. Do you also encourage just giving feedback on a weekly basis for those types of things as well?
Yeah, again, sustainable lens. If you are going to take the time, and I see people who I'm assuming are veteran teachers as well, so we can all chime in. My advice to you is if you are going to take the time to read anything students produce and give them meaningful feedback, I don't care if it's a worksheet, if it's an ending routine like I'm advocating for, make sure there's a functionality in place that they read it so that there can be a response. How often do teachers grade or give feedback on things and there's no mechanism to be absolutely certain that students are seeing it? Homework is the perfect example. Like, I spend all this time outside of school grading homework. Well, great, but only if teachers or students are seeing your feedback. Okay, so for us, this organized binder hat now, you don't read the kickoffs. We do that together. It's a reteach, we're writing it down. I'm asking you to respond to a prompt once a day, and if I'm on a traditional schedule, I just get 5 of those. Again, sustainable, might be a sentence or 2 a day. You saw our format. It's not meant to be a big time suck either. It's just meant to be the skills practice and that formative feedback. I get more formative feedback, more important information from that learning log about the content, about their ability to write, about their ability to articulate themselves, about all this stuff than I ever would from homework. I'm not here to get on the homework argument, although I think it's inequitable and largely ineffective when it's used as a formative assessment, and research has proven that. So I guess I'm getting on my soapbox, but how we use it, we need to be more mindful of, because it just doesn't work for that. And that's what we've historically used it for. Hopefully.
Thank you.
Email me. You have my email. I'd love to. You're a new teacher. I'm here to help.
Thank you.
What district are you starting in?
I'm from Chicago, Illinois, so I'll be in CPS.
Right. We've worked with them. I just talked to Evanston yesterday.
Oh, okay, cool.
All right, sorry. Tangent.
We have a question in the chat from Josette about how long does the initial process of getting the class into the routine of organized binder usually take?
Okay, that's a great question, and I'm glad you said organized binder. Surprisingly fast. It's amazing, and what ends up happening, this is the ultimate sign. I've always told teachers, I've been a new teacher mentor, the sign of someone who has really good classroom management is not seen when they're there, but when a sub's there, right? What goes on when you're not in the room? And when this routine is in place and you commit to it, students start driving it. It's hilarious how many stories of someone thought, myself included, my lesson is so jammed, we can't do the kickoff. I don't have time. I can't spend even 2 minutes on that. And you would think it was like a day off. You would think it was like spring break. You'd like, I've had this happen where students show up and they're like, where's the kickoff? You know, and I'm like, oh, we're not going to do that today. Get your binder out, sit down. We're going to start the lab right away. And they're like running around the room. They're telling kids in the hall, there's no kickoff, like mayhem. So once you put the routine in place, that's what I'm saying, like be consistent with it. I would say by week 2, students are driving that. I would probably guess that if you're doing these strategies on your own, it might take a little bit longer, but that's okay.
We have another question from Lily about how fast is it to train students on a digital organized binder?
I don't use one, so I wouldn't know.
Okay.
I'm being facetious. My instruction is all asynchronous, so in that sense, it's digital. But what I try to tell my students, and I think this is true of just one-to-one schools, first, let's recognize that a device is not a learning tool. It wasn't designed for that. These big tech companies did not design laptops and Chromebooks and iPads for learning, right? But they can be leveraged as a productivity tool, and at best. And what I tell my students is, this is just the new window into our interaction. Like, this is your new textbook. This is where you're going to get to some introduction or some lesson. And even though that may not be live virtual instruction, just think of this as a window, and it can help you be productive in your learning. That's where I go. So what I don't, when you said the question was asked about a digital organized binder, I see it digital only in that's how they're interfacing with it. I want them, I don't have one right in front of me, but I want them to have that physical artifact. And this is just an edge for me in terms of, as an educator, I get it, and forgive the adjective here, but like all things digital are sexy. Like, it's the new app, it's the new thing, and it's like, we have this, there is actually a name for this condition, but it's like, it must be good. We need it. And I'm not saying they're not. I use a ton of those tools, but how we use them and why we use them is important to think about. That's why Organized Binder is not an app. And if I have anything to do with it, it never will be. You can't learn executive functions with an app doing it for you. GPS is a great example. That's a great app. We all love it, and we need it, and we use it. But if I was tasked with teaching you how to navigate, I would never want you. You know what I mean? So same thing with these executive functions. I don't want you to click on it and be like, here's this and here's this. I want you to get your hands dirty and try it. Hope that makes sense.
That is all the questions in the chat. If anybody wants to unmute, you're welcome to, but otherwise we will probably wrap up here.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Denise, did you have a chance to put the